Again, he always adds a lot to the debate.
Mike asks on Twitter how you feel about doing away with the Bush-era tax cuts and just how much tax revenue would those cuts bring?
You know, strongly oppose doing that. I think raising taxes on, one, job creators, which many small businesses are included in that bracket, and secondly, actually the people and professionals who are most likely through their consumption to bring us out of this very poor economic recovery, if you can call it that, is exactly the wrong prescription. Secondly, we don't have a spending problem. We don't have a taxing problem in Washington. We have a spending problem. We will continue to have our historical average of revenues coming in. So Washington's going to get what it usually gets. The problem is spending has just so exploded. Size of government, 24% of our entire economy, absolutely unsustainable. So that is a big difference between Republicans and the president. He wants to try to tax our way back to a balanced budget. You can't do it. In fact, today you'd have to double everyone's taxes in America in order to balance a budget. Even that wouldn't do it. So we need to tackle the spending side.
Jane joins us from Miami on the Republicans line. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for C-SPAN and thank you for your service, Congressman Brady.
Thank you, Jane.
I want to first say that I'm very comfortable with having rigorous debates about budget and extensive problem solving about the way that our money is spent. So I thank both sides in Congress for doing that. And I'd like to speak specifically to Pell Grant money, because I'm concerned that you're cutting it. For me, it's not what you're spending, it's where it's ending up. I will tell you a specific experience. I work with kids who are trying to go to college, and I had a young man who had no home, no computer, and no cell phone. So when he filled out applications, he would use my cell phone number. I got phone calls from every low-quality, non-accredited online college in the country. And people would call, and they would call themselves college counselors, and they couldn't even string together a sentence that was grammatically correct. So I started looking into this. It was very concerning to me, and I found stories of students who had gone to school to become massage therapists and sound engineers and, fill in the blank. And they would go to school for a couple of years, end up $40,000 in debt, first 2 years of their Pell Grant money taken away. Then I heard stories of universities where 90% of the kids that were enrolled were homeless. And the tragedy of this is that after a couple of years of this, they couldn't even transfer their credit because it was non-accredited work that they had done. And I would appeal to you, if you don't have time to work on this, to get one of your fellow congressmen to take a very quantitative and qualitative look at where the Pell Grant dollars are going. Because you know and I know that there's always going to be a faction of the country that's very good at getting a hold of the federal dollars. And this is an example, by the way, where a state-run government college, university, is putting that money to better use.
Two thoughts. One, I agree with you. We have to root out every example of fraud and abuse, whether it is in Pell Grants at private colleges or public colleges. Those Pell Grants are important, especially for families trying to get their kids both through the first 2 years of college and beyond, which is critical. Secondly, we've seen a huge explosion in the Pell Grant budget in the last couple of years, so large we can't sustain it. I think it's a mistake to make a promise to young people and their parents you can't possibly hope to ever afford and to keep. Republicans' approach is Pell Grants are critical. Let's make them sustainable. Let's make them part of a budget we can actually afford as a nation. And I'll tell you this, what worries me, I think as tuition's gone up, we're seeing whether people are in private or public colleges, the amount of debt they end up with is just staggering. And so we've got some big challenges in that area. And thanks for bringing that up.
Marcelo in West Haven, Connecticut joins us on the Democrats line. Hi there.
Hi. Now, I have a question. I keep reading in the paper that Social Security is bleeding, indebtedness and so forth. I'm 81. My Social Security has been reduced. I don't know how much, and transferred to Medicare. Now, when I see in the paper that Social Security is $2 trillion in a hole, and all of it is because our great government that takes care of us, government, they've been taking money out of there. Now, that does not show in the budgeted deficit. That's why they probably do it. But I'm paying for it. That's my money. Isn't it against the law to take money from a trust fund that doesn't belong to them? Now, I'm curious.
It isn't, but it probably ought to. For 20 years or more, government has taken from the Social Security Trust Fund, borrowed from it, put in effect a piece of paper in a filing cabinet and say we will owe this when the time comes due, and the time is now due. Last year and the year before, Social Security has paid out more than it's taken in. We as a nation have had to borrow $41 billion 2 years ago, $45 billion I think last year, just to make the payments on Social Security. There is no money in the trust fund at all. People who say, look, we can just borrow from the trust fund and pay back for the next 40 years, I don't think realize all that money has to be either borrowed or come from taxpayers today. One of the reasons Republicans are focused on trying to reform Social Security once and for all for the next generation, for people 54 years or younger, is that it won't be there in its current form. It won't be there at its amount when people need it the most. We think there's some smart ways, some common sense ways to actually make it solvent once and for all. But the longer we delay, and the more you're hearing all the demagoguery and scare tactics today, we keep putting that off. That's what really hurts the seniors, delaying reforms of Social Security to make them solvent.
In the House Republicans' Ryan plan, Social Security, here's what's on the table, according to the Wall Street Journal, requiring Social Security officials to submit a plan for restoring balance to the fund if it isn't sustainable. What's off the table is raising taxes to pay for it. In President Obama's plan, what's on the table is backing any bipartisan negotiations to strengthen Social Security. What's off the table is privatization or cuts for current and future beneficiaries. Maverick writes on Twitter, most companies balance their books by revenue and expenses. So what do you consider revenue?
As far as the federal government,
Yep.
all in all, I think the tax revenue we're bringing in obviously is the main part of our budget as a government. And that has, despite the recession, over time, the last 40 years, stayed pretty constant, about 18 to 19% of our overall economy. The problem we've got today, obviously, is that this government's spending so far beyond whatever we can do. Raising taxes won't balance it at all. One point I do want to make, though, is the president really isn't really leveling with people about Social Security when he says there can be no impact on current or future beneficiaries. We agree on current. In fact, for those coming into Social Security for the first time, even 10 years from now, Social Security will remain as it is today. But the president's really not being honest about what needs to be done for the younger generation. If we stay with the system we have today, pay-as-you-go, the two major options are to, over time, over decades, slowly raise the age, and secondly, tie Social Security benefits to cost of living rather than wages. Has to be done. Or if you want to take another approach and change it, create a system where younger workers can take a small amount, pool that money, and help it grow over time so they have a real account with real assets to it. What I love about the Ryan plan is it says the time for ignoring it is over. The president needs to lay his Social Security plan on the table, Senate Democrats, House Republicans, and then let's have a debate about the real ideas to solve Social Security. I think it's a great approach.
Wall Street Journal has this graphic, numbers from the CBO looking at the accumulated federal borrowing as part of the gross domestic product, looking at the president's February budget, the Ryan proposal, and then the Bowles-Simpson proposal, what they would do. Let's go to Berwick, Pennsylvania, where John is on our Republicans line. Hi there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, Mr. Brady, I'm a Republican, but I'm not a Reagan Republican. As I'm sure you remember, Dick Cheney said that Ronald Reagan proved that deficits do not matter. I don't think he ever proved that. I think deficits really do matter. Now, regarding these, Senator Grassley, he gave a speech on the floor of the Senate. He said that there was $84 billion going to the oil companies as subsidies. Here in Pennsylvania, we're engaged in a debate on the Marcellus Shale.
Yeah.
We're finding out now that these companies, these gas companies, are actually selling these oil leases to foreign countries, and the gas will be shipped overseas. I think one of the outfits in there is Chesapeake from Oklahoma. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the facts are a little different than that. One, what the President or Senator Grassley like to call subsidies are the way that oil and natural gas, which is critical to our economy, has been treated in the tax code since about 1913s. And it is like other industries, tailored to that industry, those risks, those long-term costs. I think they're exactly appropriate. And I think to at this point, raise taxes on energy manufacturing in America, chase those jobs overseas, exactly wrong thing to do. Two, I think this is a good debate about oil shale and the role it plays in the government. It has and is being done safely. And I think we make a mistake as a nation if we try to in effect, strangle that opportunity in its crib, because that natural gas is so abundant and clean for our economy, for our environment, and supports great paying jobs as well. In fact, yesterday, a number of us introduced a bill to position natural gas as a second transportation fuel, something we desperately need in this country. I think there's great opportunities for that abundant resource, and best of all, it's made here in America. Chesapeake's relationship, I think they have entered into agreements with companies from other foreign countries. That's not so unusual in the U.S. We have countries and companies that want to invest in the United States who see this as great potential. We ought to support investment in America in a major way.
Caller from Texas, Jeb on the independent line, reaching us from Denison. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for C-SPAN. I've got a comment and a question. First off, my comment is if one were to pay attention to any sort of media that has an interactive element with the community, you hear the general public largely, and actually more so now than ever before, we're turning independents. You start hearing more independent voices out there whenever you're actually asking the general public. And my comment is, I think it's a shame that with such an independent voice amongst the people, that I really believe we should have a non-party affiliated voice in the House as well. I mean, if nothing else, it'll help with the debates. But regardless, my question is, why is it that when we talk about budgets now, we talk about them in a 10-year or a 12-year time frame?
Because it's sort of like shooting for the moon in space. If you get off this year, next year, the year after that, you miss your goal by a wide margin. So looking ahead on every dollar that's spent or every dollar that's cut, I think it's critical if we're trying to set a goal. Where do we want this country to be in the future? Not this year, not this month, not next election, but in the future. That's really, I think sort of a key to all this debate up here. I think it's a good one. And on your first point, I really do see an independent voice in America, and it is oftentimes attacked in Washington. But the Tea Party is playing, I think, a hugely beneficial role in all this debate. They're holding members of Congress of both parties accountable. I know back home we have great leadership in our Tea Party. They're average men and women trying to make a difference, who want a limited role of government. They want to have more freedom, and they're holding everyone accountable, including me. They're doing it as volunteers for all the right reasons. I have to. I get offended. In Washington, there's sort of this discussion And I hear they almost treat these people like they're, second-class citizens or worse. And in truth, they're playing a critical role for us. So I actually see that independent voice surfacing in America, and I think it's great.
Let's squeeze one last call in from Texas, this time coming to us from Sherman. Hugh on the Democrats line. Hi, Hugh. Hugh in Texas, one last try. Good morning. Are you with us? You're on with Congressman Brady if you are. I think we lost him. Let's finish with this. Who would you like to see as the GOP nominee for president in 2012, asks Jim.
I want to see a candidate who's willing to be bold and take on the tough issues facing the country. I'm a free enterpriser. I think the best person will surface through all these campaigns, and I know this. Boy, we desperately need a change in the White House. If we're going to make some changes and actually tackle these big issues, we have to have a president who leads. And I think as a nation, we're starved for someone who will lead in these areas.
Congressman Kevin Brady from Texas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Libby. Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, we'll talk about hospital errors and the president's new initiative to cut down on the number of illnesses and deaths.